Imagine this. You step outside, look up, and bam, rings. Gigantic glowing rings stretching across the sky. What if Earth had rings like Saturn? Let's blast off. How planetary rings work. First, let's understand what planetary rings actually are. Saturn's rings are not solid. They're made up of billions of tiny particles. Some are no bigger than a grain of salt, while others are as large as small mountains. These fragments are mostly water ice mixed with rock and dust, and they orbit the planet in an incredibly thin, flat disk that stretches for hundreds of thousands of kilometers. The rings stay stable thanks to a delicate gravitational dance. Tiny moons, known as shepherd moons, help keep the particles in line, preventing them from drifting too far apart. And gravity from the planet itself ensures the rings stay in place around its equator. Now, imagine something like that circling Earth. Scientists think rings could form if one of our moons, or maybe even a giant asteroid, was torn apart by a collision or pulled apart by Earth's gravity. The debris would eventually spread into a ring system. Earth may have even had rings once early in its formation, but if they existed, they've long since vanished. What they'd look like from Earth. Now let's take a trip of the imagination. If you looked up at the sky today and Earth had rings, what would you see? That depends a lot on where you are on the planet. Near the equator, the rings would appear as thin, bright lines, like glowing threads across the sky. They'd rise straight up from the horizon and pass directly overhead. In places farther from the equator, like New York or Tokyo, you'd see the rings as massive arches stretching across the sky. In the polar regions, they'd form a towering crown above the horizon. But here's the jaw-dropper. The rings would be visible day and night. During the day, they'd gleam faintly in the sunlight. At night, they'd reflect the sun's rays and glow softly against the stars, casting silvery light and shadows on everything below. Imagine ancient humans building temples that align with the rings, or modern skyscrapers with observation decks just for ring gazing. The size and brightness of the rings would depend on their width and density. If Earth had rings as broad and bright as Saturn's, our entire sky could be transformed into a living work of art. How rings would change life on Earth? Earth's rings wouldn't just change the way our sky looks, they'd affect life in surprising ways. Let's talk sunlight. The rings would cast shadows on Earth, especially during dawn and dusk. These ring shadows could create cooler temperatures in certain regions, potentially shifting climate patterns. Some places might have longer twilight hours, others might be dimmed during key parts of the day. That could alter ecosystems, agriculture, even animal behavior. And think about our nights. In areas where the rings shine brightest, they could outshine the moon. It might never get fully dark. That could mess with human sleep cycles, migration patterns for birds, and the visibility of stars. Stargazing might be tricky, but the rings themselves would become the stars of the show. There's also the psychological impact. Constant glowing arcs in the sky might affect how we feel, how we connect with nature, and even how we dream. Cultural traditions would evolve around them. Maybe entire cities would form where the rings are most dramatic. It's not hard to imagine how rings could become part of our identity, appearing in flags, clothing, architecture, even technology. The cultural impact. Now let's dive into the cultural explosion that Earth's rings would create. From religion to art, the rings would become a central part of human expression. In ancient times, people might have worshipped the rings as celestial guardians or divine halos. Myths would be written about their origin, and festivals would revolve around their appearance. Poets would write sonnets about their changing shimmer, and entire languages might include special words to describe how they curve, split, or glow. Imagine paintings of the rings spanning every cultural age, from Renaissance masterpieces to digital projections in modern galleries. Film directors would use them for dramatic shots. Musicians might compose symphonies to the rhythm of their patterns, and storytellers would weave them into sci-fi tales and bedtime stories alike. Tourism would shift dramatically. Cities like Reykjavik or Anchorage, with their wide, clear views of the sky, could become hotspots for ring viewing getaways. Businesses might offer sky gondolas or virtual ring walks. Schools would teach kids how the rings change over time, and buildings could be aligned to maximize their visibility during equinoxes. In short, the rings would become humanity's shared sky poem, a unifying visual language across cultures and generations. the downsides. But not everything about Earth's rings would be sparkles and awe. Let's talk about the challenges. First off, satellite traffic. Earth's orbit is already packed with satellites, space stations, and space junk. Rings would create a dense and dangerous region around the planet. Launching rockets would require precise navigation to avoid collisions with ring debris, communication systems could be affected, and we'd have to rethink how we access space. There's also the environmental concern. Ring shadows might cool parts of Earth, but they could also disrupt ecosystems. Plants that rely on sunlight might struggle in shadowed regions. Solar power systems would have to be redesigned to account for irregular light. And then there's the social and psychological side. Constant night brightness might lead to sleep disorders or stress. People living in regions with poor ring visibility might feel left out of a global cultural phenomenon, possibly creating ring envy, or even geopolitical disputes over best ring views. So while the rings would be magnificent, they'd come with baggage. It's a cosmic trade-off between beauty and balance.